Good morning. Our study this morning is in the 56th chapter of Isaiah, the 6th verse. David, would you word a prayer for us this morning?
Heavenly Father, as we come before thee at this time, we pray that our studies would be according to thy will, that we would glean thy word, that we would apply it to our lives. Watch over us at this time, Father. Help us to keep our focus on thee. Most of all, Father, we thank thee for thy Son who gave his life for us, for the sacrifice of giving him to us. Watch over us. Keep us under thy guidance and care. We ask these things in Jesus' name.
Amen. 56th chapter of Isaiah kind of is a mixture of discussion with regard to the contemporary condition of the social order at the time of Isaiah, and some references to the new era, that is the era that was going to happen centuries later, the New Covenant era. We've often talked about Isaiah being sawed asunder, killed. His prophecy included the reign of Manasseh. Now, Manasseh's father, Hezekiah, was a good guy. He did a lot of reforms. Hezekiah's father, Ahaz, was a bad one. And so in between Ahaz and Manasseh, we have Hezekiah, who was a good king, did a lot of reforms. Manasseh was a terrible person. Think about the condition of the social order during the time of Manasseh. As we look at the Second Kings and in Chronicles, there was just all kinds of terrible things going on during that reign of Manasseh, during Isaiah's latter years. From your knowledge of history, what were some of the things going on in the social order at that time? Well, there was rank idolatry. Manasseh's sons passed through the fire, at least one of them, of Molech. What's that about? Child sacrifice. I mean, the social order was so bad that some of them chose Molech over God. Now, how horrible is child sacrifice? How horrible today is infanticide, where in some jurisdictions, babies that are born at the choice of the mother or someone else can be killed or can be extracted from the womb limb by limb. Now, so when we think about the horrible conditions of the social order in the time of Isaiah, obviously not everybody was sacrificing to Molech, right? Not everybody was, what were some of the other things that they were doing? In the 56th chapter, it talks about, keeping the Sabbath. Now that was something unique to the Jewish community, keeping the Sabbath. Okay? But some of them weren't keeping the Sabbath. I'm sure some of them were. What else were they doing? They were covetous. What's so bad about that? I mean, what's so bad about wanting stuff? Pardon me? Is like idolatry. Covetousness is idolatry. But I wonder what's so bad about wanting stuff. I mean, what's so bad about wanting stuff? I want stuff.
There's nothing wrong with wanting in and of itself. We become to the point where we're almost lusting after it, willing to do whatever to get it, and we dwell on it, it preoccupies our thoughts. Then it becomes wrong. There's nothing wrong with saying, well, I would like a new suit of clothes, or I would like a new couch, or whatever.
Throughout history, what was the Jewish community known for? Pardon me? Thriftiness? Throughout history, what was the Jewish community known for? It's not politically correct to talk about that, but what were they known for? What else? Being clever business people. We even have an expression that relates to that, don't we? Well, I'm not going to put it out there, but we even have an expression. Huh? Yeah. You know, this idea of covetousness was kind of well, if they were covetous, their religion just kind of broke down, right? If they didn't keep the Sabbath, it was just an indication that they were irreligious. And Isaiah references those things. Now, we might think, and this has not. Yes, Kathy. Okay, you're saying that, say that again. You're saying that if they didn't keep the Sabbath, that was just kind of an indication that they were
separated from God, and that they were more religious towards God, and that is their only God.
Yeah.
And have incorporated themselves into marrying and what have you, and following more pagan practices, they are separating themselves from God, and therefore they are not of God any longer.
Yeah. So. If in that era they didn't keep the Sabbath, that was just kind of an indication that, you know, they're irreligious. Like in the church, if you don't attend services, that's kind of an indicator of a lot of other things, right? Yeah. We don't have any problem. We don't have any real problem with covetousness in this country, do we? Huh? We have a big problem. And forget about it. Forget about Democrat and Republican politics. Just wipe that out of your mind. Do we have a problem with covetousness? Do we have a problem with people in power rigging the rules so that one group of people gets a lot and another group of people gets a lot less? On both sides of the political spectrum, we have a real problem in this country with, and forget about what you hear on television or whatever, with the distribution of resources. We have a real problem with that because there are those that rig the rules of the social order, you see. Well, they had all of that, and in the 56th chapter of Isaiah, he talks about that, and then he also talks about the future. But let's go to 56, beginning with verse 5, about where we cut off last time. Even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name better than the sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Now, there, what's he talking about? Present or future? I will give them. Pardon me? It's in the latter times. Also, the sons of the stranger that join themselves to the Lord. Now, in verse 6, he talks about these strangers. Who are they? The foreigners, the people that are far off, the Gentiles, and the sons of the stranger that join themselves to the Lord. How do the strangers get into a relationship with the Lord? Not by birth. Well, the new birth, but not by physical birth. They make a conscious decision to join themselves to the Lord. But is that enough? But what's the next phrase? To serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, everyone that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it. Now, he's talking about the future there. Why does he invoke the Sabbath there? We don't keep the Sabbath in the new era. I mean, there's no scriptural authority for keeping the Sabbath in the new era. So why does he invoke the Sabbath there? Keeping the Sabbath. He mentions the Sabbath in the second chapter, the second verse, the 6th verse, and also later on one other verse he invokes the Sabbath there. But I wonder why he invokes the Sabbath there, that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it and taketh hold of my covenant. Well, it had to do. He's emphasizing the obedience. Under the Old Testament era, obedience involved keeping the Sabbath. In the New Testament era, obedience involves keeping, among other things, keeping the Lord's Day. Right? In verse 7, even them I will bring to my holy mountain. Now, even who? The people that join themselves to the Lord, the Gentiles, whoever. And then I will, in verse 7, I will bring to my holy. I will bring to my holy mountain. Even them I will bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in the house of prayer. Now, was the Old Testament temple the house of prayer for all nations? Herschel says no. That was for the Jews. Was Jerusalem a holy mountain? It was for the Jews. Now, from them will I bring, that is, these people that join themselves, Jew or Gentile, that join themselves to the Lord and are obedient to the commands. You see, this idea of keeping the Sabbath is being obedient. The emphasis there is obedience. It's not Sabbath in the new era, it's obedience to the covenant the new era covenant. To them I'll make my house a house of prayer. And the Apostle Paul talks about that, being the house of prayer being the church. Verse 8, the Lord God which gathereth the outcast of Israel saith. Now, will there be some of Israel that got involved in this relationship with God? Obviously. The church was made up of Jews to start with. The original church was a Jewish nationality church. The Lord God which gathereth the outcast of Israel saith, yet will I gather them to him beside those that are gathered unto him. It's neither Jew nor Gentile. It's all nations are received the invitation. Then in verse 9, when we get into verse 9, remember Isaiah he's preaching that Judah is going to go into captivity. That was one of the messages that he put forward. And so as we look at verse 9, when it says, and ye beasts of the field, come to devour, yea, all ye beasts in the forest. Now, some scholars say, that has reference to these Babylonian beasts, these beasts from Babylon. But then maybe he's talking about the leadership of Israel, of Judah, of Jerusalem. He might have been referencing them as beasts. When you think historically of the leadership of Israel, to some extent they were beasts, right? Now look through the ages down to the first century. Could you describe the Jewish leadership of Christ's time being beasts they would devour? Herschel says, think so. Well, what kind of beast would have allowed, what kind of ruling authority would have allowed the horrible situation that Christ endured? I mean, what kind of people would have allowed that? They would have been total beasts, right? I mean, you wouldn't treat your dog. You wouldn't treat anybody the way they treated Christ, you see. I mean, they were beasts. So this may refer to, the leadership of Israel. How could the leadership of Israel, the leadership of Jerusalem, how could they stand by and allow child sacrifice? How could they do that? What kind of people were they to allow such horrible treatment of babies?
They pretty much be the same kind of people they are today. They do that today.
Yeah.
Our government allows it.
So you see, this could be that he's talking about the Jews, the Jewish leadership, or it could reference to his, the Babylonians coming in, and of course they were beasts, the way they treated the captives. In verse 10, his watchmen are blind. Now he's really focusing in. He's really zeroing in on the leadership, the Jewish leadership, his watchmen. Wouldn't you say that would be their religious leadership, the watchmen, the overseers, the people of that were supposed to be in charge of keeping the race pure in terms of religion. His watchmen are blind. They ignored corruption and contributed to corruption and were part of the corruption. They are all ignorant. They're all dumb dogs. They're all dumb dogs. Now, that's a pretty good description of of bad people. Dumb dogs. They cannot bark. Sleeping, lying down. Loving to slumber. Now, would that be a good description of the leadership of Israel or Judah, Jerusalem at the time of Christ? Yeah, kind of, dumb dogs. And not only that, yea, they are greedy dogs. Now think about this a minute. If you're Isaiah and the king is Manasseh, and you are preaching about all these the corrupt things that the king's engaged in, and the corrupt things that the king endorses, how long do you think you're going to last as a preacher there? How long is it going to be until the ruling class puts a stop to your preaching? And so it's no wonder that Isaiah was killed, and there's good evidence that he was killed. Calling them greedy dogs. Now, you could in our country, you could get away with calling the leadership a greedy dog, couldn't you? I think you probably could. But we have a different governance system. In that day, no rights, no particular rights. However, even where people have rights, like in our country, could in fact the majority establish policy that would allow people to be thrown in jail for saying anything negative about the policies? And the answer is yes. The majority could, in fact. Now, as we play this out in our environment, there are some checks and balances, right? Separation of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The people who set up our government, and I don't mean to get off track here, but the people who set up our government were, they were almost inspired, I think, because the executive is held in check by the legislative branch, right? And both are held in check by the judicial branch. Now, the only problem is if all of them were corrupt. If all of them became corrupted, then there'd be a problem. You see, The court looks after the rights of the minority, so to speak, the individual. The individual can appeal to the court if their rights have been violated, by the other branches of government. So, but these people in verse 11 are described as greedy dogs, which can never have enough. Is there any example of in the first century of those Jews being those leaders being so greedy that they would even steal from their parents?
The Lord spoke of such.
Pardon me?
The Lord condemned some of the Jews for that very thing.
Yeah. I mean, they just misconstrued the law to the point where it was okay not to take care of your parents if they were in need. Let them die. Let them starve. And that was the attitude of the Pharisee community. Yet they are greedy dogs. You can't get enough. Reminds us of people today. After you get $1 billion, why would you want more? After you get $40 million, why would you want, or $1 billion, why would you want more? If you get $100 billion, why would you want more? Greed. Power, greed. So, they're shepherds that cannot understand. Now he's talking about the rulers, particularly the religious rulers. They were on the take. The religious rulers were on the take, as well as, I suppose, the civil rulers. In the middle of verse 11, they all looked to their own way, everyone for his gain and from his quarter. It was all about materialism in that community. And the rulers were probably the worst. Now, we don't have any trouble with that today. There's no problem with materialism today. There's no problem when a person gets elected to an office that has an ordinary kind of bank account, but somehow during the process, some of them end up with millions. And we see that today, and it was prevalent in that Jewish community. Then he says in verse 12, come ye, say they, I will fetch wine. He's identifying the kind of the attitude that's in among those people that are evil. Come ye, say they, I will fetch wine, and we will fill ourselves with strong drink, and tomorrow shall be as this day, which and much more abundant. Well, that's an interesting attitude. So, what's the result of all this wealth and materialism and so forth? What's the result of that? Huh? Gluttony. Looking for something. Looking to alcohol, looking to drugs, looking to something else, that's the end result. I think that's what he's saying. That's kind of the end result of all this greed and power and evil, Kathy.
Like everybody's looking for all these different idols to fill up this emptiness inside that only God can do. So they're never satisfied, and that's why they keep going for more and more. It's just
I didn't hear you. You're saying that's why that might be the reason they went off seeking idols, something different.
idols instead of God, and they were never satisfied. They needed more and more and more because they could not fill up the void that only God could provide.
Yeah, and Kathy, when you think about that, what was involved in Baal worship? What was involved in, and oftentimes what's involved in what was involved in idolatrous worship of various kinds? What was involved? Matthew says what wasn't involved. Well, and you come down to the time of the Apostle Paul. What was the main activity? You don't need to say it; just think about it. The main activity in connected with the temple of Diana of the Ephesians. It wasn't good, right? What was involved in Baal worship in that time? Wasn't good. All kinds of debased, immoral activity. Really bad. So, one thing led to another, and it became worse and worse. And this may be a little bit off point, but I just picked up the Dispatch this morning and read just one story of a dude in Portsmouth, Ohio. An attorney, a prominent person in the community, had been on the city council. And in the back room, so to speak, operating a drug and sex ring, prostitution ring. Think about that. And it just kind of shows the progression of bad things. Well, in chapter 57, Isaiah signals some severe warnings. Isaiah describes in chapter 57 kind of the national character of the Jews of his day. He kind of describes their, how they're looked upon. And let's think about when we think about the French people, the people of France. Don't we have kind of an image? When we think about Germany during Hitler's era, an image of that culture comes to mind, right? When we think about some nation in Africa, there's kind of a character of, we kind of have an image of what that's about, what that country's about. Well, in chapter 57, Isaiah kind of talks about the character, what they were like. He talks about their indifference to the death of righteous people. He talks about the practice of idolatry, of self-gratification, of transgression, just general transgression. So he kind of lays out the character of the people at that time when he says in verse 1, "The righteous perish, and no man layeth it to heart. And merciful men are taken away, and none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. Now, the social order was so bad that when righteous people were harmed, when they were killed, when they perished, nobody seemed to care. What, in your study of the Kings and Chronicles, what does it say about Manasseh shedding blood? Manasseh living at the time, of course, Isaiah living at the time of Manasseh. What does it say about Manasseh and shedding of the blood? Shedding of blood. He shed much innocent blood, and it was throughout all of Jerusalem. Throughout all of Jerusalem. In every quarter of Jerusalem. The scripture implies that there was just blood everywhere. Shedding of innocent blood. Where was the leadership? Where were the people of good conscience? Where are the people of the church who are really doing something about the shedding of the blood of children before they're born? There are a lot of good organizations out there that are doing some things about that. But what are we doing about it? Personally, I support some of those organizations that are out there on the front lines, but what am I doing about it, you see? That's kind of what bothers my conscience. What am I doing about it? And we can say, well, we're not really a part of this social order. Well, hey, those people affected, we might say, we don't want to get too much involved in this social order. Well, is that the right attitude when it comes to the point that the righteous perish and it doesn't seem to matter? No man taketh it to heart. Doesn't matter, about these things. The righteous perish, and no man layeth it to his heart. Nobody cares, Isaiah was saying. And the merciful men are taken away. That is, the kindly men, the good people are taken away, banished to prison or removed somehow, shipped off to Siberia, so to speak. And none considereth that the righteous is taken away now from the evil to come. Now that's an interesting expression, from the evil to come. Shortly after Isaiah, what's going to happen to Jerusalem? Shortly after the death of Isaiah, pardon me? Going to be, and that invasion is going to involve horrific calamities. And I think Isaiah is saying, well, when he says that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come, at least the righteous, these people that are banished or killed, they're not going to have to experience the horrible massacre that's connected with the Babylonian invasion. He may have had that in mind. He shall enter into peace. They shall rest in their beds, and one walking in righteousness. He shall enter into peace. They shall rest in their beds, each one walking in his uprightness. So maybe an extension of that idea that the people who had been killed by Manasseh, at least they're not going to have to experience the captivity. That may be what Isaiah's saying here. Then he goes into, but draw near hither, ye sons of sorcerers. Now he unleashes his admonition, unleashes his, probably even his ire, his ultra concern on these people. But draw near hither, ye sons of the sorcerer. That's not a very good, you wouldn't want to be the recipient of that kind of discussion. The seed of the adulterers and of the whore. Against whom do ye sport yourself? Against whom? Against whom do you sport yourself? Against whom make ye a wide mouth and draw out the tongue? Are ye not children of the transgression, a seed of falsehood? Now, wouldn't you like to have been? Wouldn't you like to have had a really good picture of how the people were reacting to this kind of preaching? What if a modern day preacher would get up and give that sort of description to the audience? They would probably be picking up stones and picking up furniture and so forth. Well, Isaiah is full force. Inflaming yourselves with idols under every green tree. It was so bad. The idolatry was so rank and so widespread and so bad that they had just idols all over the place. Under trees, in caves, just all over the place. Idols all over the place. And what's that idea of inflaming yourself with idols under every green tree? Slaying the children. Well, what's that? Inflaming yourself. Well, it had to do with their excitement with regard to this immorality connected with idolatry. It's just these people are just animals in that regard.